Welcome to the $1 Million Nonprofit Podcast. I'm Tom Kelly, your nonprofit catalyst. As the founder of Charity Auctions Today and Donor Books, I've spent almost 2 decades helping organizations like yours break through fundraising barriers, engage communities on a deeper level, and accelerate meaningful growth. In this podcast, along with my incredible guests, we'll uncover transformational ideas, tackle challenges head-on, and share insider strategies that you won't find anywhere else. Each episode is designed to take your nonprofit to the $1 million mark and beyond, because impact doesn't scale by chance, it scales by choice. So let's get started. In this episode, we dive into the fundamentals of nonprofit fundraising with Haley Cooper, founder of The Savvy Fundraiser and author of Sow, Grow, Lead. Haley walks us through how to shift from transactional fundraising to building long-term donor relationships, ensuring nonprofits raise more money with less stress. We explore why most nonprofits struggle with donor retention, the biggest fundraising mistakes like last-minute event planning and lack of follow-ups, and how nonprofits can increase engagement through storytelling, branding, and transparency. Haley shares practical strategies, including how to build donor stewardship plans, systemize outreach, and leverage existing supporters to drive donations consistently. At the end, we answer the critical question, how can a small nonprofit with limited resources create a fundraising strategy that scales? You'll leave this episode with actionable insights and a clear roadmap to build deeper donor relationships and maximize your fundraising potential. Haley, thank you so much for being on the $1 Million Nonprofit Podcast today.
Well, thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to talk to you.
Well, this is a great topic that I know that I love talking about. Anything that helps a nonprofit make more money is one of those things that just drives me to, just kind of gets the juices flowing, right? And it's funny because a lot of nonprofits just assume that, hey, I'm going to run a fundraiser, and they throw something together really quick and they throw it out in the world and they think they're going to make all of this money. And I don't think that's really the case, right? And I know that you work with other nonprofits about putting together fundraising strategies, but how often do you work with somebody and find out that they just think that putting together a fundraiser and launching it out with no strategy, no kind of thought behind it, and they think they're going to raise all this money, ends up kind of crashing and burning?
Yes, I find that a lot. And I just actually led a webinar on donor retention strategies earlier today, and I shared a story of a fictitious character, but really something that we could all relate to. Her name was Beth, and she was like working, and her director of development came in and was like, you need to send an invite for an event. And it was like 2 weeks before the event. It was scrambled, and, it was rushed, and it was transactional because it was like, we just want this from you, and we need you to give this to us. And it led to donor fatigue. It leads to donor confusion, and you're not going to get the responses that you want if things feel rushed, if they feel transactional, and if after the event, there's no follow-up. So it's you ask, and then there's no strategy for how you're going to thank people after that event. I think not only is it important to get people in the door, obviously, but it's important what you do afterwards as well. So yes, I do see, besides the fictitious character that I created, I see a lot of nonprofits who rush when they have a need for the organization, when something arises, they're reactive, and it can lead to donor confusion and less fundraising and less money that comes in the door.
Yeah, talking about just not following up with donors after the event is over is something that I don't think a lot of, unless you've gone through it many times, no one really thinks about that. They think, hey, thanks for the donations, thanks for participating. And then they're off now thinking, okay, how can I utilize this money for my mission? And not thinking about, hey, how do I thank my donors, or how do I, maybe there was some money left on the table, whether it be maybe an auction item or a silent auction or a different event like that they don't even think about, maybe re-engaging with them to see if like, hey, sorry you didn't win, but maybe would you like to contribute to help us, move towards our mission? And it's funny because we have this whole fundraising platform called Charity Auctions Today, and we just built a donor communication tool just for that reason, because we found that, only like 14% of our users actually followed up with people,
Wow.
with the losing bidders and the winning bidders, but
Hmm.
really you're following up for those losing bidders that were willing to donate and pay, hundreds of dollars. They just happen to get outbid at the last second. And you don't think about all the money that those people would still be willing to contribute if you just followed up with a simple message and a thank you and here's our mission. So it's funny that you mentioned that as being one of the biggest things that people don't do. And we actually created this whole thing because of that need. And a lot of people just don't think about that. So yeah, that's probably one of the biggest things that people just kind of neglect after the event's over.
Yeah, I think for me, I've talked to a lot of nonprofits recently who are transitioning from events to individual donors, and they want to build out a major gift program, but they're like, we don't have any major gift donors. And I'm like, you've literally had 4 events a year. You've had at least 200 people show up at your event who have said yes, who have donated in some capacity. And you're telling me that there's no like individuals in your database. And I think a lot of nonprofits struggle with that because there hasn't been intentionality. They've trained, for lack of a better term, their donors to show up at those events and be event donors, right? And I think, over the last few years, that shift for people to want to show up to gala after gala has changed. And it is that intentionality about, streamlining some of those efforts to engage those donors beyond the event.
And I know we're talking about fundraising strategy here, but how important is it to really kind of, after, somebody does donate to you through one of your fundraising events or campaigns, that you kind of share with them kind of how their money is being used, or maybe show the impact that that donation has had on the organization. You know, do you kind of encourage your customers or your clients to kind of put something like that in place? And is that important?
Yeah. So, according to the Fundraising Effectiveness Project done by the Association of Fundraising Professionals, donor retention rates are at 42% for current donors. And it's 20% for new donors. So, that means like we're recording this in the second week of January, that all of those new donors and all those donations that you got at year end, only 42% are likely to give again. So, and it's because people don't give because one, they're not asked. They're not there's not transparent communication about how their contributions are being used, and they're not told thank you. And so having I would say the most important part is in your retention efforts, in your efforts to raise money for your revenue, is those donor stewardship strategies. And we can all say, well, we don't have time to follow up with our donors. There is technology that can help streamline some of those communications, whether it's a new donor and you put a welcome series together on an email platform that you use, and or with your platform and your donor communications, it can automatically be sent out after the event, and it welcomes people into your organization, immediately shows them how their contributions are going to be made, and then how they can be engaged in a deeper way beyond financial contributions. And so I would say, if anything, in your fundraising strategy, having a solid donor stewardship plan is probably the most essential piece.
Yeah, I agree. And I think about something as simple as my daughter's travel softball team. They always ask for donations, and I donate and become a sponsor. Most families do. And the team never gives money about how it was used, like what outside of the or off the field, like uh, personal trainers did they hire, batting coaches, what type of skills did they pay, did these donations that we just raised, how are they being used? Or like, I don't know, are they being used to, fund some other family just to join the team? There's so
Yeah.
many questions, and this is just a simple, like, sports, youth sports analogy here. But, it goes with every nonprofit, right? You don't know where your money's being used, and you kind of want to just tell people, hey, this is the good it did, they're going to feel great. And then they're going to want to contribute again because they're going to have that same feeling over and over again. So yeah, I definitely agree with you on that one. How would you kind of describe the current state of nonprofit fundraising strategies?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I think the current fundraising landscape is evolving rapidly, and it's driven by changing donor expectations, whether that's across generations or demographics, technological advancements, and economic uncertainty. Donors, like we just talked about, want to seek that transparency. They want to see, we're not in the business of ROI, we're in the business of ROIs in terms of impact. So they want to see the impact of results, and donors want to have meaningful connections with the missions they support, especially as you get down to the younger generations. So I think, especially in terms of fundraising strategy and the current state, you have to focus on diversified revenue streams, because a lot is coming down the pipeline, whether it's at the national or state level, where government grants are changing and what is the amount of spending for nonprofits. So it is hard to just rely on one source of income. So I think it's really important to diversify your revenue streams. And to stay competitive, organizations need to adopt adaptable strategies that balance both short-term fundraising goals and long-term sustainability. Organizations need to, like we talked about a little bit before, move from that reactive mindset where they're just raising funds on the fly and having that last-minute fundraising mindset to a proactive, well-planned approach that allows for that flexibility and adaptation. And it invites your donors in a meaningful way, because fundraising is no longer, and fundraising strategies are not a standalone function where fundraising is over here. It is part of the entire organizational culture, and it has to be deeply integrated into marketing, program delivery, relationship management, and internal collaboration. So I think when it comes to the current state of fundraising landscape, teams have to work together, not only internally, but with their external stakeholders to understand where their donors are at, how they want to be communicated with, and where are their passions and interests, and then develop that fundraising strategy based on that input.
Yeah, and I like what you said at the very beginning, the ROI. So not return on investment, but return on impact. It's kind of a great thing, great analogy there too. When it comes to different social media platforms, how does the fundraising strategy change depending on the platform that organization kind of gravitates to, whether it be like a Facebook, an Instagram, in person, LinkedIn? Does the strategy change a little bit, or should they think about different strategies for different platforms if they're doing online fundraising? Kind of what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so that's a great question. And I always like to caveat this with that I'm a savvy fundraiser, not a savvy marketer. So while I have been put into my shoes in roles where I have to be the marketer and the social media person, understanding, like I told my husband this year, that is my goal, to learn more about marketing. But with that, I have seen Instagram kind of relates to those younger generations, and it's very short form video content, engaging them and giving them those clear ways that they can get involved in the organization. LinkedIn is more so for businesses and for foundations. So whether you can follow them and see when their grant applications are due, but also building relationships with them and the key people that are part of those corporations that you seek to partner with is key. And then you can share like articles about your nonprofit or the issue you are addressing. Call out your corporate partners on LinkedIn, because obviously with corporations, they want their clients to see that they're doing good in the world, because it leads to higher customer returns. And so I think, and then Facebook, I would say, is probably for the older generation. And I think on there, it is again sharing like the short form, short stories. And I think across all platforms, storytelling has to be key, and also brand consistency. I think you have to be able to have cohesive messaging. And if someone looks at your LinkedIn, they look at your website, they look at your Instagram, they know who you are just by the colors, by the images, by the tone of the stories that are being told. So I think that consistency and then utilizing those different strategies based on your target. And I also think it's important to understand your target audience. So like I said, Facebook might be for the older generations, the boomers and the Gen X. So understanding that target audience and then developing your communication strategy based on who you're trying to talk to.
Yeah, and I know you wrote an amazing book called Sow, Grow, Lead, strategies for growing nonprofit leaders. And, you talk a little bit about like foundational assets. What are some of the foundational assets that like every nonprofit needs for like a successful fundraising campaign or event?
Yeah, that's a great question. And yes, I did write a book, So Grow Lead. It has my face on it, which is kind of fun. But it was about my own personal experience of starting a nonprofit when I was really young. And I wanted to also it's not just a story for me, it's a story for the listeners, it's a story for the readers as well, so that they feel less alone, but also have some strategies and those key foundational elements. So I think the first thing for any fundraising campaign is internal team alignment. If you have misalignment within your team, everyone's going to be doing X, Y, and Z, and they're not going to have that clear direction, those clear expectations, those clear goals, and the shared accountability to be able to carry out it effectively. So you want to make sure that every single person understands their role in that fundraising campaign, what the purpose is, how they play a role in that purpose and carrying it out, and then equipping each person that's involved with the tools they need to promote the fundraising campaign from the rooftops. So I would say that is foundational. You also want to have a compelling case for support. So you want to clearly communicate your mission, impact, and why funding is essential for your organization. And it's not necessarily a case for support of funding out of budget crisis or budget need. It's what is the cost of not investing in the mission? Why does it matter? What's at stake if people don't invest in the mission, and how is your organization meeting that, and why is it important that people donate to your mission? I also think part of launching a fundraising campaign, and trust me, when I was a founder that I wrote my book about, I had an Excel spreadsheet. I didn't have a donor database. But I think in terms of anything, some way or a system that works for you to track donor relationships, giving history, and engagement. And then, like we said a little bit earlier, a clear engagement plan. So you want to have a documented strategy outlining how you will build and maintain relationships with your donors beyond the ask. And lastly, I would say having engaged leadership and board. Obviously, if you're a small nonprofit, probably under 500,000, it's going to be a working board. But I think the key to an engaged board isn't necessarily the capacity to give or their network. It's equipping them with the tools to be able to go out and become your best ambassadors.
Yeah, and I love that. And, one of the things that, putting that foundation in place just kind of helps you kind of get one of those like uncertainties of what do I do next kind of out of your head so that you can just follow a framework. And so kind of having some of these things in place kind of lays the foundation, gives you a little bit of a framework that you or your team can follow to just kind of maybe delegate some tasks and do different things. Now, whenever I'm speaking or even the book I wrote, my main goal when I'm coaching people is how to get them from startup nonprofit to the $1 million mark as fast as possible. So talking to, everybody listening here that's under that $1 million mark, and has maybe limited resources, where should they focus their energy when they're building out their first or second or third fundraising strategy?
Yeah. And I think something that you said earlier, where, a lot of these nonprofits, their goal is to raise more money. But I think um, there's a different way to look at that, because in order to raise more money, and you need to raise more relationships. So you have to start with relationship building. Like I mentioned, when I was working, with nonprofits who have had events, they've had boards, they've had volunteers, they've had people that have already said yes to their organization. I would start there. Those people are committed. They have the affinity for your organization. And I was just reading somewhere else that affinity trumps capacity. I don't know if that's completely true, but people, if they're engaged and they have said yes, they are more likely, again, to become ambassadors on behalf of your organization. So if you have limited resources, I would leverage existing networks, like I said, including your board members, volunteers, and anyone who has donated, whether big or small, because this can be more effective and less costly than broad outreach campaigns. And you want to, like I said before, you want to prioritize that storytelling by sharing the authentic impact stories and clear call to actions across all platforms like your email and social media. And I would say also, you want to, again, build strong connections with your supporters through personalized outreach and updates so that they get excited to promote your organization on your behalf and become more efficient by using technology so that you can streamline some of these efforts and build those personal connections. So I would lean into low cost, high impact strategies that create that long-term donor loyalty.
Well, and this kind of also kind of goes into my next question of like, how do you kind of convert them from a transactional giving to creating a sense of like community and belonging for these donors? Is that kind of some of the same strategies, or is there something different that you would maybe suggest to kind of move that donor from that or the nonprofit, I should say, from the transactional giving to kind of creating that like, this is our community, this is what we're building, help join our mission, this is who we're trying to impact. How would you suggest that they can kind of make that little tweak to their I guess thought process or mindset?
Yeah, so I think some of the strategies do apply. And I think it's all comes down to what your priorities are and what your values are. So we can say, like, oh, someone gave $2,500, but I don't have the capacity to thank them. Well, I would take a step back and say, what is the cost of not reaching out to that person? Because if that person gives again, they're more likely to become loyal donors. And so I think we can focus on little things that might get us immediate gains, but they don't necessarily have that long-term sustainability. So I would get really clear on what your priorities are, what your goals are. And if you come across like a situation where you're like, okay, well, I really have to do this, but like, it won't take as much time to pick up the phone or send a handwritten note or some sort of personalization, right? And that'll actually help move your mission forward. I also think it has to be a two-way communication. Invite your donors into the conversation. Again, you want to create that buy-in and belonging where they feel like they're a part of the mission, and obviously they're not directing it and creating mission drift, but they feel like they have an opportunity to share feedback and feel heard. You can create like different engagement opportunities that again are low cost but high impact, such as maybe ask a donor or a board member to host a house party where they invite their network and all you have to do is show up and talk about your organization. You could have volunteer days, and obviously that does have some cost to it, but what is the cost and how can that in-kind support help you? And also, again, it comes down to being transparent, and that will help you go from transactional to fostering a sense of community and belonging because people want to be clear about how their funds are being used and invited into the conversation of how they can transform the organization with you.
Well, and coming from the experience that you have, you wrote a book, you own a company called Savvy Fundraiser, where you actually help nonprofits put these strategies in place. That what you just said there, where you having that donor outreach after the fact or after the event's over, and kind of building that relationship, it almost seems like a full-time job. If you're a nonprofit that has just the founder and maybe one or two volunteers that work part-time, is there like a framework or a strategy that you like to kind of put in place with the nonprofits you work with to kind of help ease maybe the stress that the founders may be thinking of right away, of like, oh God, I got to reach out to 200 people and thank them? Is there something that you do or put in place that just makes that a little bit easier for them to digest and manage, so it can just be very easy and simple, whether it be just training a volunteer to do it, or maybe even getting their son or daughter to kind of make some email outreaches, or handwritten letters, or even phone calls? Is there anything that you would suggest that would just kind of ease their mind if they're thinking that this is way too overwhelming for me to do?
Yeah, and I mean I've been there both as a solo fundraiser in a very small nonprofit where I feel like I'm doing six jobs, and it can be really hard. And so if you are a listener that has in those shoes, I see you. I have been there. And I think one, it's really important to and the executive directors that I've worked with don't necessarily like to make the ask, or they're kind of scared to ask for money. And so they get busy doing other things. We all do that, right? When we're like scared to do something, we're like, we're just gonna go get distracted over here because this like seems like this is a better use of our time. So
Really
I think
busy.
it's yeah. So it's helping them understand again, what are their values, what is important to them, what matters, and creating 1 to 3 fundraising goals. It doesn't have to be everything. You don't need to do events and corporate partnerships and grants and individual giving. Like that is a lot if you're one person and things get missed. So what is one thing that'll help move the needle forward on raising revenue for your mission? And I will also say, as a consultant, like, yeah, just having those conversations with yourself to dive deeper into some of those fears, whether it's around money or your money mindset. I'm not a queen on that, but I know there are other people that help with that. But I think really getting clear on those fundraising strategies, where do you want to spend your time, and then creating your daily tasks on how that moves towards that goal.
And we've had some great advice here today, and I know we're getting a little long here, so I want to kind of wrap it up with one final question for you. What would be basically your one piece of advice that you would give to a nonprofit just starting out, that's basically just trying to grow their fundraising, and just put something in place, that solo, founder that's just getting started? What would be your one main piece of advice for them, so that they can basically take action today and implement it?
Yeah, so I would focus on depth over breadth. I said that right. It's better to build deep, authentic relationships with a small group of loyal donors than to spread yourself too thinly. So, again, leverage your existing network and start communicating early. Many emerging nonprofits underestimate the power of personal connections. So you can reach out to friends, family, community leaders. Where do you hang out? You can make a bubble chart, and past collaborators. Develop a clear message that speaks to the heart of your mission and invites people into the journey rather than just asking for the donations. And I would also start with building trust from the get-go, being consistent and focusing on, again, those relationship building strategies rather than the short-term gains. I would prioritize consistency, clarity, and collaboration, because scaling fundraising is about building trust, sharing impact consistently, and empowering donors to feel like true partners of your mission.
Yeah, and I think the true gem right there was, you don't need a lot of donors to be successful. focus on a smaller number of donors and build that great relationship with them so that they can buy into your mission, because they're going to be the advocates that can potentially bring in the next group of donors. And again, I think a lot of, founders, when they're starting, they think they need hundreds and thousands of donors to survive because they're only thinking one donation at a time, when really they should say, hey, how can I build a relationship with this one donor and get them to be a donor throughout the year, or put them on a monthly donation plan or a bi-yearly plan. So, I think that's a great mindset shift that you just shared, that a lot of people will hopefully take in and realize that, hey, I don't need a large group of donors to be successful. I just need to take care of what I have, and then they'll slowly grow from there.
So good.
Yeah. Haley Cooper, this has been wonderful. Thank you so much for sharing all of your insights. Tell us really quick before we leave today a little bit more about the Savvy Fundraiser and what you do for your nonprofit clients.
Yeah, so the Savvy Fundraiser, my mission is to help nonprofits get buy-in and belonging so they can focus on the right fundraising strategies and raise more revenue. I do this through fundraising strategy and implementation, board training and development, as well as this process I'm trained in called EMC leadership. I help facilitate teams to build better cohesion and collaboration.
Well, that's awesome. And everybody listening, Haley knows her stuff. Go buy her book. We're going to include the link in the bio, and visit her website. Where LinkedIn is another social media platform that you're very active in. Is that correct?
Yes, you can find me as I'm on here. I have pink. You'll see me pink. Blonde hair, you can't miss me.
And that's part of the brand, right? That you talked about earlier, right? Is
yes.
that it? I love it.
That's
Live in the
correct.
brand, right? So funny thing. The book I wrote, $1 Million Nonprofit. Part of my branding section is living your brand, and you are an example of living your brand. And I love that. So keep up the great work. So Haley Cooper, thank you so much for being here today. Everybody, get in Haley's world. She knows her stuff. She always gives away great free resources on her LinkedIn. So make sure that you follow Haley on LinkedIn, Instagram, buy her book, get into her world. You won't regret it. Haley, thank you so much for being here today. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you, Tom. I've truly enjoyed this conversation.
Thank you for tuning in to the $1 Million Nonprofit Podcast. If you'd like free resources to take your nonprofit to the $1 million mark, visit realtomkelly.com/playbooks. And because I'm committed to helping nonprofits maximize their impact and reach as many people as possible, contact us at hello@realtomkelly.com to explore bringing me in to speak at your next event. And as always, I'm looking forward to sharing more transformative insights with you on our next episode.